New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. You can now download a free PDF copy or purchase a beautiful printed edition of Issue 5 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is somatics, the study of the human body as a living system, a vital process, as opposed to the study of the body as a thing, an object, as in anatomy or physiology. We're particularly going to focus in on the relationship between our own somatic awareness and issues of health and illness. With me today is Dr. Thomas Hanna, founder of the discipline of somatics, author of the book Somatics, editor of the magazine Somatics, and director of the Institute for Somatic Training and Research in Novato, California. Welcome, Thomas.
Hi, Jeffrey.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Glad to be here.
You take a very provocative viewpoint in challenging an age-old assumption that the human body has to become diseased and crippled and shriveled up as we grow older. In fact, you suggest just the opposite.
Yes. What I know after some 13 years of working in this area of somatics is that the human body, as the human being gets older, should become more supple, looser, more comfortable, more efficient in its use, in better balance, better coordinated. That is, we should literally grow in that direction. But in general, we one, do not know that this is possible, and two, we don't know how to maintain it. And the field of somatics really is a sort of it's a new initiative that is beneficial to anyone in showing people how they can, by using certain internal events in their bodies, literally change things which are not comfortable or that are not running right in their bodies, because we have an enormous amount of power that we can use to retrain our bodies if we know how to do it. And the area of somatics is dealing with just that topic.
It's as if perhaps we've been culturally hypnotized to believe that we must become more decrepit as we grow older. We must have more aches and pains and problems with our body, that this is normal. It's never questioned.
Well, it's perhaps more than a cultural hypnosis, in that as we look about us and look at people, by the time they get in their 40s, 80% of people have sore backs all the time. Here, Europe, all of the urban industrial societies show that typically by the time people are in their 50s, other kinds of things have happened to their bodies. And we look around and we see that it happens to almost everyone, with certain very notable exceptions. And obviously something is happening, but we haven't been clear about what is happening. And one of the things I've discovered is that there are, within our central nervous system, certain reflexes which are triggered particularly in urban industrial societies, and suddenly explain the mystery of why in urban industrial societies bad backs are 80% of the population.
What you're suggesting then is that the problems that are reported, bad backs is one problem amongst many that people report as they get older. These problems are, I guess we could call them functional. They have to do with the way we treat ourselves rather than with anything structural in our bodies.
It's the word. It's functional. Because the assumption is that when people, suddenly you have something aching going on here, or there's something wrong with the hip, or odd things are happening in the neck, because it's very common to have sore necks, sore shoulders, chronic headaches, that is in some sense a breakdown in structure. And people are aided and abetted in that by physical examinations, which in scientific medicine will show, for example, a person who has constantly sore back, the back will be arched, something like that. And the muscles will be extremely tight because they pull the back like that. A normal back is roughly just a little bit curved, perhaps, a slight bit of the lordotic curve. But under certain conditions, those muscles become so tight that a person is arched and their belly sticks out. And that condition, which at first looks to be a structural change, is actually a functional change that happens from the brain to the muscle. As you know, muscles don't do anything that the brain does not tell them to do. So if we understand the relationship between the muscles of our body, and we've got 800 muscles in the body, and the brain, we realize that if something goes wrong in the muscular system, distorting the body like this, for example, or causing the belly and back to be like this, or a typical depressed chest such as this, these are not structural changes, but are literally something that has occurred in the brain, notably in the sensory motor tracts. And if one had a way of entering into the sensory motor functions, one could literally see a person who was like that and depressed, and within a few sessions of retraining, they come like this again. And that's in general what the area of somatics has to do with. The awareness of the internal functions of the body, which, if we become aware of them, give us a way in which we can change those functions.
And so much of our outlook on the world is carried right in our body. If a person's feeling like this and tight and crunched over, well, they must feel helpless or imprisoned.
Their entire experience is refracted through that pain.
And then their outlook on the world is that, this is a terrible place, this is
Yes.
a prison,
Yes.
and they feel tired, exhausted all of the time. And you use the term sensory motor amnesia
Yes.
to
Yes.
suggest that when we tighten our muscles and hold ourselves in these uncomfortable positions, we literally forget that this is what we're doing, and we think that this is our environment, this is the way things are, unchangeable.
People with constantly, say, arched backs that are very sore are victims of sensory motor amnesia. Now, when I say sensory motor, we're referring to the part of the brain which is actually the very top of the brain. And we have it at the very front of the brain, just beyond the central part we have nothing but motor neurons running in a little circle here. We have the sensory neurons right behind it. And when we send something in our body, it goes directly up the spine, goes into the sensory neurons, and those stimuli feed across to the motor neurons, which immediately goes back into the muscle system. And in fact, all the things we do with the muscle system, like if I reach over to touch my knee, all the time that I am moving, I'm getting constant sensory feedback so that my hand doesn't go this way or that way. I know where my arm is. Even if I don't look, I know that it's going to come down.
This is what we think of as mind-body coordination.
Yeah, It's very simple. It's standard neurophysiology. And the area of somatics simply works with the internal structure of neurophysiology in the sense that internally it's something that we're aware of as function, as process. And if we can be made aware of certain functions within our bodies that normally we cannot control, the fact of being sensorially aware of those areas, for example, of the lower back, being more aware of the muscles of the lower back, I instantly gain greater motor control over those muscles. And if I'm in some sense out of the possession of the ability to let loose of the muscles that hold me like that, by becoming sensorially aware of that, I immediately have a new talent. I suddenly can drop that a little bit. And in fact, somatics has to do with how we use awareness to change the sensory motor system.
Well, I guess there's something about growing up, becoming an adult, where maybe we don't play with our bodies as much as children do. We lose some of the habits of flexibility that children have.
Anyone who is over 14 years of age, you have to ask them, when was the last time you rolled on the ground? When was the last time you jumped over a fence or scooted under a bush or climbed a tree? Our bodies are made to do things like that. And children have wonderful bodies because they're doing just that. And at a certain moment of time, we take up our careers, we marry, we start paying insurance and getting into the whole catastrophe of adult social life. And we don't have time to climb trees. We don't have time to chase after dogs and cats. We don't climb over fences. And a certain kind of atrophy begins to come in. And primarily, though, as we begin to work and worry about things, certain other reflexes start coming into our system, and that's when we begin to lose motor control, that is, muscle controls of our body.
Now, you use the term atrophy. I think that's a key word in describing this process. Could you define it a little more?
Well, atrophy is just loss of control. It's loss of literally the loss of the ability, in this case, to release a muscle that has become chronically contracted. Normally, a voluntarily controlled muscle, when you cease to use it, if I hold my arm up and I'm using my deltoid muscle, when I relax it, it should relax 100%. It would be odd if I said, all right, relax my arm, and it'll come down there. You say, well, wait a minute. But as we'll perhaps see later on, if I show you some of these things, that kind of sensory motor amnesia occurs in almost all bodies, your body, my body, and anyone else who might be listening to us.
In other words, we fail to totally relax.
We can't. We literally cannot do so. And the area of somatics is something that allows people to once again sense the internal process, and by sensing it, they gain motor control. Again, the sensory tracts feed into the motor tracts. So if we have new sensory information, we get new motor control.
Now, many people who are experiencing aches and pains all over their body, if they were to go to a conventional health practitioner, a chiropractor, or a medical doctor, these people are not necessarily trained to look at sensory motor issues, are they?
I think it's a terrible injustice to take what I call problems of sensory motor amnesia to physicians or to any other person who follows types of the medical traditional training. You can't, if muscles are tight, whatever they are in the body, by pushing on it, injecting chemicals in it, you cannot change the program from the brain down. It won't happen. So you can do anything locally with the muscle, but if the muscle is, let's say, 30% contracted, say a hip joint muscle, something of the backs, it's going to remain 30% contracted as long as that signal to contract it 30% continues. You can push the muscle, you can stretch it, you can heat it, you can put electrical currents into it, sonic vibrations, all kinds of things. But nothing will change the program unless you deal directly with the sensory motor functions. That's what somatic is about.
And when you work with a client, you normally just feel to tell which are the muscles that are tight and which are the ones that are loose.
I do what scientific medicine doesn't do. Scientific medicine uses x-rays, which very inconveniently does not show muscles. And so when a physician or radiologist sees say a lower back that rather than being relatively erect is really curved like that, quite arched forward, he sees a structure that looks deformed, but he doesn't see the cause of that deformation.
He might diagnose that this is the discs or the spine, or rather than looking at the muscles that are holding it that way.
I've worked with 2,000 people who've been told that they had narrowing of the disc, that they had pressure of the disc, they had almost ruptured disc, the discs are protruding, they're subluxated, etc. And in 2,000 cases of people with that problem, there's never been a one that did not leave after the retraining totally comfortable, without benefit of surgery of any kind. And the happy thing is they never came back to see me again. Because the people that go through this retraining are people who do not need other people to help them get out of these problems once they learn how to handle their own internal process.
Well, Thomas, I don't understand all of the medical terms that you just used, but I do understand that you've described two basic reflexes that the human being tends to lock into and then forget, and that is responsible for much of the sensory motor amnesia that you've described.
These reflexes are, in a word, stress reflexes. And may I show you something?
Yes, could you stand up? Sure.
Yeah, let me take my coat off, and I'll show you the two things that happen to all of us over a period of time. One of these is I've termed since I've referred to it, the green light reflex. You say, see a person, if it's a person who at 18 years of age stands roughly like this. Now, over a period of time, that person gradually, and this is by the time they're in their 30s, they've already become like this. Why? Because these muscles, the paravertebral muscles that are up and down the spine, in fact, if one feels a ½ inch to the right and left of the spine, you will feel the paravertebral muscles, which are the biggest muscles of the trunk. Now, a reflex, in fact, causes that reaction. The telephone rings, and suddenly,
It's
the
as
doorbell rings. And
if you're
like
thrusting
that.
yourself forward into the world.
Yeah, it's actually called the Landau reflex. And the Landau reflex is the reflex that begins when human beings first start to stand up and to sit up and then later on to walk. And so for the rest of our lives, that Landau reflex is associated with, let's go. You erect the spine, getting ready to move. It's triggered in our kind of society constantly. Now, another thing that we see that happens to human beings is not that they're standing like that, which is typical. And of course, when they walk, they tend to move very stiffly. But another thing we see, and I referred to it a while ago with depression, is a chest that is not like this, but a person who is like that. Now, this is generally associated with aging itself, with the senile posture. But if you and I are standing quite erect and suddenly someone fires a shot, for example, instantly this will happen.
A protection.
It's called the startle reflex. Again, this is a reflex that's in the brainstem. It's not voluntary, it's an involuntary. Like if the shot is fired, you and I cannot help that because it's a reflex. So if you trigger an involuntary reflex like this or like this over and over again, as we do in urban industrial environments, we see a person who either gets stuck like this or gets stuck in doing this because gradually they habituate. A person who is very, very active, very effortful, tends to grow into a swayback formation and to be one of those 80% that has constantly sore muscles of the back. A person that is somewhat apprehensive moves into that. And it goes with people who are very insecure. And a lot of people living in urban environments are extremely insecure and frightened. And so we see two postures that are very obviously based on reflexes that have become habituated. Now, if we can learn to sense that, we can control them.
Their two reflexes almost appear to be opposite, as if they work against each other.
Exactly opposite. And in fact, most people have a certain degree of that and have a certain degree of that. And by the time you see, say, a person in their 60s, they will have a combination tight like this. The belly is trying to stick out, and then they tighten the stomach muscle, and you'll get this kind of movement. And you say, my gosh, that is the posture of old age. Precisely. The posture of old age is literally learned, and in some sense, it is adapted to over years. But it can be unlearned since it's an adaptation. You can reverse it, and the very postures that I've just shown you, and the very soreness and the stiffness that goes with them can totally be eradicated or avoided, preferably avoided.
And I would think that when one holds oneself in these fashions and we're not aware of it, in addition to all the muscle cramps and muscle tightness, it must not be good for the internal organs or the joints or the immune system.
If one has constant contraction of the startle reflex, the central thing that occurs is not just that. The central event is the abdominal muscle depresses the chest. It depresses breathing. Elderly people who are bent forward like this all the time are also people who have frequent urination. Why? Because the pressures on their abdomen is so tight that the bladder feels as if it's full when it's only a quarter full. And so generally it's the case people in their 60s have to get up 4, 5, 6, 7 times a night. It's very common. Once they learn to relax and control the startle reflex and the abdominal muscle is soft again, guess what happens? No pressure on the viscera, the frequent urination stops, and other pressures that cause constipation or indigestion, those pressures are gone. So as the viscera are relieved of their pressures, an enormous number of problems that occur as people get tight simply disappear.
Yeah. Well, we hear a lot of talk these days about calcium and about how as people get older, particularly women, the bones weaken and we get this kind of a posture.
Yeah.
You're suggesting that this too may be the result of just bad habits.
That posture has nothing to do with osteoporosis. That's a medical myth, nor the lack of calcium. But it does have to do with the lack of exercise. People who become, let's say, by the time people get in their 50s, the last advice that they should take is to take it easy. The last thing they should do, because we know that bone structure remains hard and calcified if and only if one uses that bone structure over pressure. If a person is in a wheelchair, for example, for say a year, or is in bed for a year, the bone, the thigh bone itself, becomes so decalcified from the lack of pressure that it literally, you can bend it. It becomes soft. I've seen thigh bones out of a medical lab that have been that literally are pure collagen, and you can turn them into a pretzel, that sort of thing. You see, but you see that need not occur if one is constantly active. Now, if a person isn't stuck with this and all that sort of unnecessary muscular contraction, then they can exercise, they move, they walk, and the calcium is there. For women, the only thing that they need other than frequent exercise and walks is for many of them that can tolerate estrogen, and estrogen also helps the retaining of the calcium.
Mm-hmm. Now, some exercises, I presume, are a little better than others for promoting this sense of somatic awareness, the mind-body feedback loop.
Well, in some sense, it's all of the stiffnesses that come into our bodies begin in the central area. Mm-hmm. And what I was demonstrating a moment ago, really the central part of that green light reflex is really the lower back.
Yeah.
And that's where the central pain is for most people.
But the reflex, it really moves throughout the whole body.
It involves the whole body, the whole of the body, but it's the posterior muscles that are pulled. Mm-hmm. In the contrary reflex, which is the red light reflex or the startle reflex,
hunch.
you have the opposite movement that way. And of course, most people are stuck with the two, and so that's why you see the tremendous stiffness that's in the bodies of elderly. It's totally unnecessary. I work with people who are in their 70s, mm-hmm. 80s, who look like I was just illustrating, and within about 3 or 4 work sessions, they're quite vertical, they're moving, they're going out and taking trips that they never thought they would take.
In other words, it's reversible.
Oh, it's reversible, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the good news about this. It's reversible, and the happy thing is, it's reversible by things that people do within their own bodies. That is, I don't do anything to people. Mm-hmm. I can't. But you could change within your own body. I can change myself within my own body, and perhaps later on we can see some things like that. But all of us finally should be responsible for our own lives.
You're suggesting that the promise of being a human being in a human body is so vastly much greater than we have been led to believe.
Oh yes, that's the whole point. Most people decline from the age 20 on. But it's gradually, life is a bell curve that goes like that.
Yeah, we have this phrase, you're over the hill.
Yeah, well, there's only one hill in life. It's just that, you see. But unless we realize that we have control within ourselves, that we can, so we can keep our bodies supple and useful, unless we learn that, we don't have a constant ascent. You see, It should be nothing but constant development and growth in life. I see nothing neurophysiologically or physiologically that prevents the human body from improving as it becomes older. It will change in the level of the improvements. You're not going to be able to run through a brick wall as you might have done when you were 17 years of age and a bit more headstrong. But other things you could do, you'll do it quicker, you'll move more in more balance, more coordination. That is, in some sense, everything becomes subtler and better controlled if we grow wisely.
We have about 5 minutes left now. Perhaps you could demonstrate.
You want to see something?
Yeah.
Now, because these are just theories, and let's put it in practice. You can see how startling these things are that I'm talking about.
All right. We'll be back in a moment and do that.
Okay. Now, Jeffrey, a moment ago we were talking about hip joints, so I can show you this in terms of a very normal contraction of hip joints. As people get older, even though like you have a very good body, you're in good shape, yet there's a typical kind of, let's say, attrition of the muscle system. It occurs as most people get older. Now, you could have avoided what I think that I'm about to find. Now, if you just put the leg up, and if I push this leg here, I find an interesting thing. It just stops and comes right back. Now, there's a muscle that's holding it. It's called the gluteus medius. And I hate to tell you this, but if this were totally free and in your voluntary control, that knee, rather than pushing back, would drop right down here, 90 degrees. Mm-hmm. Now,
in other words, my muscle is contracted.
Your muscle is contracted, and you don't have the voluntary ability to release it.
I didn't even know it was contracted.
Well, you didn't know, but there, look. Now, can you relax it? Relax it down. See if you just relax. Don't push it.
Yeah,
just relax it.
Sort of.
See, it just won't let go.
Yeah.
Now, that's a lack of voluntary control. It's typical. This happens to everyone's body as they get older, at least most people's bodies, unless they know some of these secrets. Now, what could you do? Well, we want to create sensory information that goes to the voluntary part of the brain. Now, I want you to do this. I want you to contract this muscle, which is the gluteus medius, very strongly, and just push it.
Push against your
hand.
hand.
Push your knee to the left against my hand. Okay, now hold it right there. That's enough. Now, this is your game from this point on. Right now, you're making a voluntary movement using the voluntary cortex to do this. Now, slowly yield your contraction just a little bit so the knee drifts inward and downward about 3 inches. A little bit farther, another inch. Now stop. Now, just so there's more variety in the feedback signal, come back 1 inch to the left. Now hold it there, very rigid. Now relax it just enough that it creeps downward another 3 inches.
Now, I really am feeling that muscle. And
oh, yes, indeed.
I think for the first time.
You're going to start feeling the soreness. Actually, that muscle's a bit fatigued and sore. 35% contraction all times, a lot. Push back to the left 1 inch. Okay. Now, you're already past where you were. You're in new territory. Now, slowly release it, and you're going to come down another 3 inches. Look. What's happening? Stop. Come back 1 inch. Well, do you think it'll go another 3 inches?
Yeah.
Try it.
All right.
Look. Now, of course, you're doing this. I'm not doing it. I'm just giving you a weight to play with, so it's a strong. Now, come back up.
It's a comfortable feeling to feel that
There's no
muscle
pain at all.
relax.
There's no pain at all. Look.
Yeah.
This is purely brain work. See, rather than pulling on muscles, now pull it back up and look where you're headed.
So I'm giving myself, it's like I'm reawakening part of my brain.
You're creating your own feedback, and you're creating sensory feedback that immediately goes into the motor
By pushing
neurons.
sort of back and
As
forth.
soon as you go back and forth, it varies the signal. Now come down one more time, and lo and behold, look where you are. You've touched. Now try to lift one more time, very strongly. Now suddenly drop it. Okay. Now, as long as you're there, get cocky about it. Act like you belong there by pressing your left leg down on the right leg. Now press it down hard, so hard that I can't even lift it. Fight. You say, you got me down here, Hanna. Now I'm not going to let you get me up.
That's
now,
another muscle,
tight
isn't it?
Tight it. Now you're using another muscle. Now you're getting entirely different information in the brain that you belong there. Now relax. Now, look. Now, here, I'll just hold this. Look. Now, just relax and watch what happens. I'm holding the pelvis, so we know it's not the pelvis thing. Now here, confirm that a little bit more. Lift up a little bit. Lift up a little bit. One more time.
On the pelvis?
No, on the knee.
Oh.
And now let it come down. One more time. Now press down. One more time downward. Hold it. Downward. Right. Hold it tight. Hold it tight against the right leg. That's it. Now relax. Okay. So there you have it.
It feels marvelous. It's as if some flowering is taking place in my brain right now.
Well, it is. The brain grew as it were. You see, that kind of hip joint release, if you wanted to do this, you see, it's the same thing. You can do that, but you could do something interesting like this. Look. Why not?
And you're 60 years old, aren't you, Thomas?
I'm 60 years of age, and everyone should be able to do that at 60.
Thomas
You
Hanna,
too.
it's a pleasure being with you, a man who walks his talk. Thanks so much for being with me.
This has been a pleasure.
And thank you so much for being with us.
Book 2 in the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues book series is a tribute to parapsychologist Russell Targ, celebrating his 90th birthday. New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos.